Continuing, I suppose, a little bit in the theme of last week. If you remember, last week we talked about the spies and the RAMBAN's understanding of the sin, essentially being a lot of political wheeling and dealing and talking behind each other's backs and that kind of thing, which is a bigger deal than perhaps we would think it is. So this Parshas Korach, also definitely goes in that direction. There is a machlokes of Ibn Ezra and the RAMBAN as to where chronologically to place this event, this whole Korach rebellion. So we'll explore that, but more importantly, I think as you go through both conversations, you see certain distinctions being made by both of them, which are very important, I think, for a certain lesson in the Parsha, which doesn't come exactly from RAMBAN, but I would like to share with you nevertheless. Okay, so to start, we'll take the Ibn Ezra's approach. He comes earlier in the RAMBAN. He responds to Ibn Ezra's approach as to where to place this. But let's start with what Ibn Ezra says. And he says, Vayikach Korach, Korach took, right? Different approaches as to what exactly it means that he took. What did he take? Perhaps he took his heart. He removed himself from the rest of the crowd. That's not an element that we're going to get into. The RAMBAN has a lot to say about that as well. But in any event, Ibn Ezra says, Zeh davar haya BaMidbar Sinai. This is what happened. This matter that happened in Har Sinai, in that area. This happened right after the giving of the Torah and the building of the Mishkan. After which point, there was an exchange between the firstborns. They were demoted, so to speak, and instead the Leviim, the Levites, they took their place in terms of serving in the Beit Midrash. I always like to get this off my chest when I talk about these kind of things, but it's very important to realize. I investigated this when I had a Pidyon Haben. I was okay to do that mitzvah when our firstborn son was born, and I always wondered. I read in a lot of books that kind of give you an overall view, or websites that talk about this thing, and they talk about Pidyon Haben in some ways being connected to Chet HaEgel, and being connected to this exchange that the Torah mentions, where the Bechorim, the firstborns, gave over their status to the Leviim. So similarly, our firstborns, they lose their status. I found that very difficult, because that would mean that Pidyon Haben should be a very sad, event. It shouldn't be something that we should rejoice in. It's not an occasion for simcha. It should be, because of Chet HaEgel, this is unfortunately something we have to do. It's important to point out that that's not really the connection. I didn't see anybody that I would view as an authority. Somebody that really knew what they were talking about, that wrote about this and actually connected it to Chet HaEgel. When you do a Pidyon Haben nowadays, it's actually meant to accomplish something which took place earlier. If you look in Sefer Shemos, right before Klal Yisrael leaves the Midbar, leaves Egypt to go into the Midbar, Hashem is already, before Chet HaEgel, telling them, you're going to separate your firstborns, they're going to be holy unto me. Right? The Sforno, he points out that there's two different, aspects that a Bechor has, or had, at least. There was the aspect of the fact that he's kind of like Hekdesh. In some ways he's dedicated to the temple. He's almost like an animal that's dedicated to be brought as a korban, except humans can't be korbanos. So because of that, we do a pidyon. We do an act of redemption, with which that holiness is removed, not in the sense of a demotion, so to speak, but more that this person, and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, I think he develops this idea beautifully. He says that this person is now being taken out of a world of being removed from the earth, and now he's coming down to earth to be able to honor and serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu here. That's the idea of a Pidyon Haben. There's a second aspect, which Pidyon Haben doesn't address, is what this person's job is. A Bechor, at least at that point in time, also had a role, a job to serve in the Beit Midrash. In addition to being dedicated like a korban, he also has a job to do. That job was something that every Bechor, every firstborn had prior to Chet HaEgel. After Chet HaEgel, then it went to the Leviim, and that exchange was one that was perpetual. That doesn't have to be redone with every new firstborn that is born. So although that might have been a very sad, story, that in BaMidbar, when the Leviim are given over, the Bechorim are given over to the Leviim, that was as a result of Chet HaEgel. That was probably very sad. That was an unfortunate occurrence, but it had to happen. Whereas now, Pidyon Haben is only relating to that Hekdesh aspect, and that's something that we celebrate. That's something we're very happy about. So I think that's always important to point out when we talk about the Leviim taking over, so to speak. But anyways, the Ibn Ezra, he continues. He says this incident of Korach and his rebellion had happened after this exchange between the firstborn and the Levium. Ki chashvu Yisrael shemoshe Adonenu asami daito lasis gedula le'echav. They thought that Moshe on his own, without consulting Hashem, decided to give over this role of serving in the Beit Midrash to his brothers. Right? Moshe was from Shevet Levi, so there was a thought that perhaps there was a little bit of nepotism going on here. Gam levnei kahas shehim karovim elav. And also they thought that Moshe was playing favorites in the sense of giving kahas, the branch of Levi, of which Moshe was a part, of giving them perhaps the most honorable job in the Mishkan, of giving them the ability to carry the actual kelim, the actual vessels of the Mishkan, which was viewed as the most honorable thing. And also, Moshe gave Levi as a whole a certain special treatment, that they all served in the Beit Midrash, in the Mishkan, in some function, and they thought that was all Moshe playing favorites. So why did the Levium plot against Moshe? Right? Even though they were of a lofty status themselves, in contrast to the rest of the Jewish people, they nevertheless were given over in service to Aaron and Moshe. Right? So in some ways they felt subservient, and they were protesting that as well. The Kesher Dasan and Aviram, who are another part of the group that plotted against Moshe. Why? They were upset at Moshe because the Bechor, the firstborn status, at least in the sense of land, right? That was taken away from Reuven, the Shevet which Dasan and Aviram came from, and it was given over to Yosef instead, right? Yosef was the one that split up into Ephraim and Manasseh. They got a double portion, and not Shevet Reuven, which they were coming from. And perhaps they thought here again, Moshe is playing favorites, giving it over, the Bechor, the double portion, to Yosef, and then to Yehoshua. Yehoshua was a member, I believe, of Shevet Ephraim.
That's already from time Yaakov, and nothing to do with Moshe.
That's what the Ramban says. We'll see. But this is so Ibn Ezra suggests that perhaps Moshe played a role somehow in giving them the double portion. I would also argue that if it was done already, fine. If you don't think it was done already, then what was done at this point in the narrative? That there was a double portion given. They didn't split up the land yet.
Yaakov explicitly said that Ephraim and Manasseh.
Right. So that ultimately is what the Ramban says. That's why he argues on this. But anyways, this is perhaps where this is what Ibn Ezra thinks where Dasan and Aviram are coming from. So everybody has their issue. Gam Korach Bechorhu, and Korach, he was also a firstborn. Kikein Kasav, and it's actually written when you give over the lineage of all the various parts of Levi. Korach is a firstborn of Yitzhar. Yitzhar was the second-born son of Kahas. But anyways, V'degel Ruvain Chona B'Negev. Ruvain's clan, they encamped in the south. But Korach B'Negev HaMishkan, and Korach therefore was south of the Mishkan. Ki hu b'Bnei Kahas, and sorry, not therefore, but Korach was also in the south. He was part of Kahas. Kahas was south, in the, I guess, more inner area, and then in the outer area where the Shvatim lied, so that's where Reuven was. So therefore you had Korach together with Dasan and Aviram being very close geographically. That's perhaps why they were able to plot together. What about the Nesiei Ha'eda, the representatives, the great leaders, which Korach also managed to assemble to his side? Who were these people? These were firstborns. These were the people that at Har Sinai, pre-Chet Egel, they brought korbanos in the whole ceremony in leading up to the giving of the Torah, or perhaps in celebration afterwards of the giving of the Torah. Why? Because at that point they served as priests. That was their role. And because of that, we have this whole test later on in the parsha where each one took their fire pan and tried to bring incense. But you had these Bechorim that essentially were upset at losing their job. That's Ibn Ezra's take on this. So ultimately, you have three different groups, right? You have, well, I guess if Korach is a group in and of himself, Korach is somebody that wants the kahuna, right? Dasan and Aviram, they want the Bechora in the sense of a double portion of land for their Shevet. And you have the Bechorim, right? Those are people that want to be Kohanim, essentially. They want to be priests again. It's interesting, if you note in the Parsha, right? Korach's first claim is Kulam Kedoshim, right? We're all holy. Very often that's taken by many in terms of drush. They want to understand that to be referring to Korach saying, we should all be on the exact same level. Everybody should be the same. But Ibn Ezra's take on it is really that's perhaps just pandering to gain general support. But Korach's agenda was also particularistic. So was Dasan and Aviram, so were the Bechorim. Everybody felt that they should be special, different from everyone else. They were upset that their role was not as special as they would like, but they wanted to be different. These are all special interest groups, so to speak. Okay. Ibn Ezra continues. He gives proofs to all these ideas that he just said. V'haraya al zeh ha'perush. A proof to this explanation is Mofes Hamata. There's the miracle at the end of our parsha of the various staffs that they all put together, each one representing a different shevet. Moshe brings them to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then a day later, Aharon's staff is the one that blossoms with almonds. That proves that his staff and the shevet Levi, they're the chosen shevet. They're meant to be special, right? So that miracle, Sharo Kol Yisrael Ki Hashem Bachar Shevet Levi Tachas HaBachorim. This was a miracle that showed to the entire people that Shevet Levi was chosen instead of the Bechorim, right? So that proves Ibn Ezra's approach that the changeover from the Bechorim to the Leviim was one of the matters of contention, right? The fact that it had to be proven that Levi was the appropriate choice. And that's why it says after that miracle happened, or prior to that miracle happening, their complaint will cease. Ki hataluna al zehaisa. That's what their complaint was. They felt that the exchange between Leviim to Kohanim was wrong. From Bechorim to Leviim. Gam amar Moshe ki lo mi libi. And also Moshe, another thing that Moshe claimed in his defense was, I didn't come up with this from my own heart, from my own decisions to make the structure of the Jewish people as it was. But the reason why he's claiming that as a defense is because they suspected him of having thought of it from his own heart, that he had done it from his own will. Hashem shalcheni, right? Also, Moshe, another thing that he says, that if this miracle doesn't happen, if the ground doesn't come up and swallow, the rebels, so then that means Hashem didn't send me. Right? But what that means is, b'shlichus hazeh, we're referring to Moshe's mission with regards to, I guess, making a social structure for the Jewish people. Ki kavar haminu b'okol Yisrael. We don't mean that they were doubting Moshe's shlichus, meaning that he was appointed to be the leader of the Jewish people as a whole. But with regards to this decision, is what they suspected him of. V'od raya gemura, another important proof. Ki kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim. Right? Korach said the entire nation, everybody is holy. Mazehu remez lebechorim shem kedoshim. Well, the Ibn Ezra assumes that everybody is holy doesn't mean literally everybody, but that this alludes to the firstborn that represent every family, perhaps, let's say. Right? The Torah tells us earlier that Hashem gives the firstborn a certain sanctity. And these were the very same priests, right? That when they were still firstborn priests that approached God at Har Sinai, they actually comprised, these firstborns, those 250 leaders that Korach amassed. Right? So that's Ibn Ezra's approach, and that most importantly, he thinks, when did this take place? This took place right after the exchange between the Bechorim to the Leviim, when the Bechorim lost their jobs and the Leviim took over. And why does that come up? Why does this come up as a result of that? It's very understandable. This was when the change that everybody is protesting actually occurred. Right? The issue is, though, that means we have to go out of order. This exchange of this switch between the Bechorim and the Leviim, that didn't happen until earlier in the Torah. And that's far earlier in BaMidbar, before Chet HaMeraglim, before a number of other events that we have in Sefer BaMidbar. So why is it being schlepped over here? We don't necessarily know. But Ibn Ezra doesn't explain very often, and he holds, and RAMBAN is going to point this out. Ibn Ezra thinks that you can go out of order in the Torah. Everybody agrees that you can go out of the Torah, out of order to some extent, but Ibn Ezra is perhaps more liberal in doing that. Usually, he's going to go out of his way to explain. Now, it's not just that everything is hefkeris. It's not just that we're ordering things randomly. That there's a connection in terms of the lessons being learned, of what's being taught, what's being discussed. But in terms of the chronology, it doesn't have to be in order. But here, Ibn Ezra doesn't do that. He doesn't tell us what the actual connection is in terms of the idea being expressed between this and perhaps Chet HaMeraglim that was just in the previous parsha.
Is it possible it was decided earlier and put into play now? That's the difference in the time?
So BaMidbar describes the actual procedure where the exchange happened, where the Kohanim the Leviim were actually taken by Aharon, and they were moved around, and they were exchanged. The Torah describes that there were extra Leviim more than Bechorim, or was it the opposite? Right, more Bechorim than Leviim, so then they had to each give 5 shkalim in their place to account for the extras. But the Torah actually describes the whole procedure, so it actually took place already. at least in terms of the order of the Chumash. Okay, so the Ramban, in criticizing Ibn Ezra, he says, "V'zemi daito Rabbi Avraham." This is, I'm just continuing in the middle of a Ramban. He introduces everything Ibn Ezra has to say. I think we just saw Ibn Ezra inside, so that's fine. But he says, "V'zemi daito Rabbi Avraham." This is Ibn Ezra's approach. Shehu omer b'makomot rabim. He says in many instances, "Ein mukdam u'meuchar b'Torah l'ritzono." He says in many places that there is no earlier or later in the Torah. Things go out of order, and he does that with frequency. And I already said with regards to my approach, Ramban says this in a number of places when he argues on Rashi or others that think that things are out of order. Kol haTorah kaseder zulasi. Kol haTorah kaseder. The entire Torah is in order. Zulasi b'makom asher yefarish hakasav ha'hakdama v'ha'achor. Except for situations where the Torah explicitly tells you that things are out of order. Very often they'll give us dates before certain events take place. And when those dates, I'm told a later date and then an earlier date, so that's when I know, of course, that things are out of order, but not otherwise. And also in situations where we do go out of order, it has to be for a good reason. But this event, we have no indication that we're being taken out of, we're going out of order here. And the Torah just continues in its narrative, so he thinks this happened right after Parshat Shalach. This happens right after the sending of the spies, right? He thinks chronologically that's what's going on. To defend Ibn Ezra, and Ibn Ezra, like we said, he doesn't mention what the connection is between these two parshios. But what would you think? What would you think is perhaps a connection between the sin of the Chet HaMeraglim and the Korach rebellion?
Well, the spies came back and they tried to bring discouraging the people, riling them up. And Korach did the same thing. He riled the people up and questioning.
Absolutely, I think that's probably the clearest connection that we're kind of just getting it over with. We're just rattling them all off. All the different instances in the Midbar where Moshe had tzaras, where he was given trouble by the people in one way or another, where people were rebellious. And as we mentioned last week, it was according to the RAMBAN a very political issue. And we'll talk about that here also. It's similarly very much...
And they each had their own agenda, too.
Right.
The spies had their agenda, and Korach had his agenda.
But it seemed that nobody seemed to accept Moshe's leadership in both of those instances. Okay. So the Ramban, who thinks everything is going in order, he explains that Hanachon Bidrash, the correct interpretation is, you can get it from Drush, from the words of Chazal. Shekas Korach al Nesias el Tzafan. That what exactly, ticked Korach off at this point? That he was upset at the fact that El Tzafan, he was the one of the members of Shevet Levi. He was appointed to be head of Kahas, of that group. That we have 3 different groups from Shevet Levi that were in charge of different areas of the Mishkan's transportation. So Kahas was one of them. And within Kahas there was El Tzafan, and he was the head of that entire group of Kahas, the people that carried all of the different items of the Mishkan. Kamam Rabboseinu, and our rabbis say this in the Midrash Tanchuma. So why exactly was Korach upset? Why did he feel he was more deserving than El Tzafan? So the Midrash actually says, the Ramban doesn't quote this, but if you look at a family tree, and the Torah describes what the Kahas family looked like, Kahas had 4 sons. He had Amram, right, Moshe's father. He had Yitzhar, Chevron, and Uziel, also after that, in that order. Korach is Aaron's the firstborn son of Amram. So Aaron's the firstborn son of the firstborn son of Kahas. Korach was the firstborn son of Yitzhar, of Kahas' second son. Right? So Korach thinks, whatever the next position of prestige there is to be given out, I should be next in line. Right? Whereas El Tzafan, who was the firstborn of Uziel, who was the youngest of Kahas' sons, so he thought he should be ahead of El Tzafan, and that's why he got so upset. That's what the Midrash tells us. The Ramban continues, V'kana gam ba'aharon, and more than that, it wasn't just that Korach wanted perhaps that position of being the head of Kahas, he also wanted Aaron's job. Kemosh Nemar, as it says in the pasuk, Vikashtem gam kahuna. Right, when Moshe is responding to Korach's claims, he says, "Do you guys want the priesthood also?" It sounds like that's what they were after. V'nimshechu dasan v'aviram imo. Dasan and Aviram continued with Korach and his following, Velo al habechora, and it wasn't, however, about firstborn status, right? Like we mentioned earlier, Ki Yaakov Avihem hu asher natla meRuven v'nasna liYosef. Right, Yaakov was the one that ultimately said that Yosef should be split into two and not Ruven. Aval gam him amru ta'anasam. But Dasan and Aviram did, however, have their own, agenda as well. BaMidbar. Right, they were upset, and this is one of the things that they say in their exchange between them and Moshe. They said, Moshe, you brought us into this wilderness to die. And you didn't bring us to a land of milk and honey. They're frustrated. They're frustrated that they don't get to go into Eretz Yisrael anymore in light of the events of the previous parsha. Okay, so RAMBAN continues. Yeah. Now, the entire time that the Jewish people were in the wilderness, there was nothing that was particularly bad, nothing horribly destructive that happened to them. Even in Chet HaEgel, even when the Jewish people really messed up, a relatively small amount of people died in the wake of those sins. And they were saved through the prayers of Moshe, who davened and fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. So Moshe was their savior at that point. They had a tremendous love for him. They loved him like themselves, and they would always listen to him. They were dedicated to Moshe. Moshe was their leader. If at that time, if after, let's say, Chet HaEgel happened, anybody would say, after Moshe defended them so eloquently, somebody was to say something bad about Moshe at that time, the entire nation would have stoned that guy. And because of that, at earlier times of the Jewish campaign in the wilderness, so when the Levium took over, when Aaron was given the position of Kohen Gadol, Korach kind of kept it inside. He didn't complain because he couldn't. He wouldn't get away with it at that point. He wasn't in a position to criticize Moshe. Everybody, the entire nation, were fans of Moshe and his decisions. They trusted him. However, later on, when we have further incidents that happen in the Jewish people, with the Jewish people in Midbar Paran, in Tavera, there was a group of people that complained, very vague as to what they complained about, but a fire came and consumed them. That was one incident. Umesu bekivros hatav arabim, and a kivros hatav, another place right after that narrative, where they complain about wanting food. They don't want to eat the man anymore, and they want to go back to Egypt. So there they had the quail was given over to them, and many died in that instance. And then after Chet HaMeraglim, in this past week's parsha, in Parsha Shalach, the sin of the spies, Lo hispal Moshe aleihem, v'lo bitla hagazera mehem. Moshe didn't daven for them there. He sort of did. We have to clarify that a little bit. Moshe didn't daven for them, and because of that, their gezerah, the decree that God made that they would stay in the wilderness for 40 years, that was not a decree that was ripped up. Right? The RAMBAN in last week's parsha, we didn't get to this last week, but the RAMBAN says that Moshe actually did daven. And the Psukim, it's very clear that he did. He davened for forgiveness, and to some extent. He didn't want Hashem to destroy the Jewish people, but he didn't go so far as to say, and also let them come into Eretz Yisrael right away. The RAMBAN says there, Moshe felt that he couldn't ask for that. That's not something that the Jewish people, by any stretch of the imagination, deserved. So he didn't want to go there. But anyways, you have all these incidents. You have a lot of bad things that happened to the Jewish people in recent times, in terms of where we are in the parsha. We just had a number of times where the Jewish people died, were punished for doing something bad. In that incident by the Meraglim, those leaders that were the spies, they died in a plague. The entire generation there it was decreed that they would die in the desert. At this point in time, public opinion was not on Moshe's side. Right? His polls were down. Right? They all were saying in their hearts that coming from Moshe's leadership or from his words, there would be stumblings, mishaps would occur. Now, at that point, Korach, who's been harboring this resentment for a year already, or a little bit less perhaps, at the fact that other people were appointed to positions of authority that he wanted, right? So now he feels like Now he thinks, now is my chance. Public opinion's against Moshe. Now I could start a rebellion.
Timing is everything.
Right? It's all about timing. Right? What we have is, so the RAMBAN, he explains, so why is this happening now? Right? Ibn Ezra answered earlier, if we're going out of order, I could tell you why. It's happening right after the incident that actually gets Korach upset, right? Which is understandable. But once the RAMBAN says we're going in order still, he has to explain, so why at this point historically? Right? And he explains it beautifully. He says, listen, everybody liked Moshe until this point. People were not on Moshe's good side as much as it was in the past, and therefore there was room to start up a rebellion. Okay. So now, the RAMBAN continues, but I said, should we do like a little bit of a review just real quick? So I think you have three groups that both Ibn Ezra and the RAMBAN talk about, even though they disagree in terms of when this event occurred. And that's something interesting to point out in and of itself. But both of them say that you have essentially three, which can really be divided into two groups. You have Dasan and Aviram, their group, right? Ibn Ezra and Ramban disagree about what their problem was. Dasan and Aviram, according to Ibn Ezra, felt that the issue was about Yosef getting a double portion and not their Shevet Reuven, right? Whereas Ramban thinks that it was about being upset about not going into Israel, right? And then you have the Nasi'ei Ha'edah, the leaders of the people that joined Korach's rebellion. These were people that, according to both Ibn Ezra and the Ramban, they wanted the kahuna, they wanted to be priests, they were the Bechorim, they were the firstborns. So that's something that they agree in, and Korach is the leader of everybody here. Okay. V'zetam, Ramban continues, to prove his point, V'zetam lahamisenu BaMidbar. What was meant by when Korach said, you brought us into this desert just for us to die, not Korach, sorry, this was Dasan and Aviram. Amru, they said, Hine hevesa oslanu el hamakom hazeh. Their claim to the people was, God, Moshe brought us to this place. Lo kayemes banu ma shenadat alasis lanu eretz avas b'chalav udvash. And he is not fulfilling the oath that he made, I guess through God, that they would take us to a land flowing with milk and honey. Ki lo nasata lanu nachala kalal. He didn't give us any portion whatsoever. We're going to aval namus BaMidbar v'niyeh kalam sham. We're going to die in this desert. We're going to expire here. Ki gam zarinu lo yatsu min hamidbar la'olam. And you know what? Not just us. They're predicting now. They think, Moshe, he's all washed up. Our children also aren't going to be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. And just like we're not going to get into the land like Moshe promised, our children aren't either. He's a promise breaker. And that was the reason for Dasan and Aviram's complaint. Right? Because Dasan and Aviram also, not just Korach, but Dasan and Aviram felt at this moment they were able to jump on Moshe and to perhaps lodge their complaints. The Hakarov, and it seems to me, this is most likely, Ki hayu ela hanikalim kulam bechoros. Everybody that gathered on Korach's side, those Nasi'ei Ha'edah, they were firstborns. Ki alkein echara lahem al hakahuna. Because like Ibn Ezra mentioned earlier, they're upset that they lost the priesthood. And that's why Moshe's response is, okay, we'll do a test. And what's that test? That everybody should take incense pans, right? Things that do what Kohanim do, and we'll see if it works out for you. And through this we'll know if in fact Hashem chose them or the Kohanim. So that's Ramban's approach. But what you have here is these two groups, Korach leading both of them. And again, this is not about Kulam Kedoshim as much as people might make it out to be. This is different groups with different interests, but both of them are special interests. They want special treatment. They don't want everybody to be the same. But you have people wanting to be Kohanim, you have people that want to go into Eretz Yisrael. Rav Hirsch, he points this out. He notices that there's different motivations, really, between the different groups. Just to read his commentary in the English, right? He originally wrote in German. So, as Moses approached Korach and Dasan and Aviram separately, right? That's important to note as well. Moshe's response to the complaints of the people, he responds first to Korach and his followers, and then later to Dasan and Aviram. Dasan and Aviram, they don't want to have anything to do with Moshe. They ignore him. He gets very upset. But in any event, you see two different approaches. Right? Moshe is trying to address seemingly two different problems. So it appears that the rising formed itself into two groups with different aims. Although the rising was against Moses and Aaron conjointly, still Korach had one thing in mind, and Dasan and Aviram another. Korach, the Levite, conducted himself as being really the champion of the rights of his tribe, insulted by the preference given to Aaron. He, the claimed representative of equal rights for all, quite liked the privileges which he and his tribe were accorded. He claims to be on everybody's side, but really he's really just after honor for himself and perhaps for his tribe. Instead of stripping himself of them, which would be consistent with his charge, he was not satisfied with them, and under the cloak of equal rights of all, sought for the dignity of the priesthood to satisfy his ambition. Dasan and Aviram, on the other hand, seem not to have cared much for the priestly office or priestly dignity. Only the 250 men and Korach and Aaron are expressly mentioned there in that test of the fire pans. But it seems to have been the political position of Moses to which they objected, and they probably only joined Korach in the supposition that once the belief in Moses' mission coming from God was undermined, his position in the nation could have altogether been diminished. In other words, Dasan and Aviram were anarchists. These were people that expressed a desire, actually. If you look at their complaint, they actually say, Is it enough, Moshe, that you took us out of a land flowing with milk and honey? It's interesting. They refer to Egypt as a land flowing with milk and honey. They want to go back there. BaMidbar, you're letting us die in the desert. Right? Why are you ruling yourself over us? But they seem to have an ideal of going back to Egypt almost. They talk about Egypt in glowing terms. And they don't want to talk to Moshe either. They don't want to have any kind of dialogue at all. But then you have, at the same time, the other group. You have the Korach group. You have the people that wanted to be on a higher level. They wanted to be Kohanim, essentially. Right? So what you have is these two different groups. One that's perhaps thinking very lofty thoughts. They want to be on a very high level, perhaps more than they can handle. Whereas you have the Dasan and Aviram group, who don't want to be part of Klal Yisrael at all. They want to go back to Egypt. They don't want Moshe to be in charge of them whatsoever. So in many ways, you have two different groups that are being united by Korach, who's not really being so honest about the fact that these are two very different agendas. It's something important to keep in mind. What else is done in a set of two in this week's parsha?
In this week's parsha?
In this week's parsha. In relation to this story. If you look, there's actually two different punishments also. It's not that this entire Korach group is punished in one blow, right? There's actually two different things that happen. The ground swallows up Dasan and Aviram, right? And in terms of the priests, the Nesi'ei Ha'edah, the people that want to be Kohanim, when they use their fire pans to bring incense, right, Hashem strikes them down with a fire. They all get burnt up. There's two different punishments that not everybody is being treated the same way, and that very much supports Rav Hirsch, and I think also the splits that RAMBAN and Ibn Ezra make, that we have in many ways punishments that fit the crime. The people that want to be higher than they deserve to be, so they're consumed by a fire, just like Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons. Right? That's what happens when you try to get too close to Hashem. Whereas the people that wanted to have nothing to do with the mission of Klal Yisrael, they wanted to be away from the didn't want the leadership of Moshe. They refer to Egypt as a place of milk and honey. Those are people that are swallowed up by the ground. They're too coarse. They're too earthly, perhaps. And that really would work well with the punishments that they have.
The people that wanted, this group that wanted to be Kohanim, and Moshe and Aaron's two sons, did they both have, Moshe's sons had good intentions, Aaron's sons had good intentions. Did they also this group?
It would seem to be, right? Wanting to be a Kohen, seems that
it wasn't just for the glory of the position, they really wanted to...
I mean, that's certainly a possibility. But at least from an outside perspective, if we don't get into the emotions, which is what they wanted, what they claim to have wanted, that itself is certainly a lofty sight, that they want to be priests, they want to be able to serve in the Mishkan, right? They want to be able to serve in the Kodesh HaKadashim. But what do you make of Korach? First of all, what happened to Korach? He died how?
In the fire.
In the fire?
Yeah. Did he fall off of the earth?
Which one?
The earth.
We're not so sure. If you take a look at, say, BaMidbar, this is the next source. This is a pasuk later when we have another counting of the Jewish people later in the Sefer. This translation doesn't do it justice, but try to translate this pasuk. Vatiftach haaretz es piha, The ground opened up its mouth. Vativla osam ve'es Korach b'mos ha'ida ba'ochol ha'ish eis chamishim v'masayim ish v'yu l'neis. I tried to translate it in a way that I think picks up the nuance a little bit. Then the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them and Korach with the death of the assembly, 250 men consumed by fire. And they became a sign.
Wasn't that, I forget where it was written, where they said if you put your ear to the ground, you can hear Korach saying,
I've heard that Midrash also.
That God is God.
Like Oilanu, something like that. Woe to us that did something wrong.
Indicate that he was swallowed? That
Midrash would indicate that he swallowed. We'll take a look at the next source that touches on this. But just look at that pasuk. And if you look in Parshas Korach itself, you'll take a look. There's no verse at all that indicates which group Korach was a member of that perished. There's nothing there. Right, but I could also read that as Ve'es Korach b'mos ha'ida ba'achol ha'ish.
Other punctuation.
There is trup. Yeah. There is cantillation. I asked a friend of mine who's perhaps a little better at this, at understanding. There are certain cantillation marks that I know for sure indicate comma. That's not here. If you look in the Pesukim, he thinks it implies more that Korach was part of the group that got swallowed up by the earth. Mm-hmm. But in any event, the Gemara itself discusses this. What happened to Korach? And there's a machlokas. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan said, this is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Korach lo min hamuvlam v'lo min hasrufim. Actually, this is the third option. Korach was neither swallowed by the earth, nor did he get burned. Lo min habeluin. I'll tell you why he wasn't swallowed. It says in the pasuk, Ve'es kol ha'adam asher la Korach, that who got swallowed up by the earth? The people that were with Korach. Implication, v'lo Korach, but not Korach himself. V'lo min hasrufim. How do I know he wasn't among the people that got burned? It says in the pasuk, ba'achol ha'ish is chamishim u'masayim ish. The fire consumed 250 people. 250 people, v'lo Korach, right? When he brings his entourage with him at the beginning of the parsha, he brings 250 with him. Mm-hmm. Implication, I mean, if he was part of that group, you'd say 251, right? The Masnisa Tana, however, another Tana taught the following: Korach min hasrufim min habeluim. He got both. He was somebody that deserved both punishments. Somehow he got both. Min habeluim. How do I know he was swallowed? Dichsiv ativla osam ve'es Korach. And this pasuk that we just listed above, the ground swallowed them, meaning Dasan and Aviram, and Korach min hasrufim, from the people that got burnt. Also, I know he was a member of. Dichsiv, it says ve'ish yatsa me'es Hashem v'tochel es chamishim u'masayim ish. A fire came out, it consumed 250 people. The Korach b'hadayu. This I don't think is such a proof, but that's apparently what this Tana thought that meant, is that Korach was among those 250 people. I think maybe there is discussion about On ben Peles not being there anymore. Right? That perhaps he's the missing one of the 250, and then you could throw in another one, and you're back to 250. Maybe that's where Korach comes from, but I'm not sure.
Right, and we don't know if the 250 is an exact count. When they say 250, they mean...
That should also mean in a general sense, which would give us...
it should be 249 or
right.
251, it's like approximately.
But in any event, I think that there's a very important lesson. Whichever direction you take in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, there's a lesson to be taught here. Korach was somebody he was the glue, I guess, for both of these groups. But they were two very different agendas. He basically made an anti-Moshe coalition. Right? For whatever reason, whether you wanted to go back to Egypt, or you wanted to go to Israel, or you were somebody that wanted to be a Kohen, join me, we're going to overthrow Moshe and we'll start everything over again. These are two agendas they're not compatible whatsoever. Right? There were people that had very lofty visions and people that had very base, horrible visions like Dasan and Aviram. He tried to represent both. That's a very, snake-like thing to do in politics. So in some ways he could get both punishments, in that he's the representative, he's the one that brings everybody together against Moshe. Or you can say in some ways, when he's trying to represent these two groups, he's essentially not representing either of them when you're talking about issues.
It was a means to an end, right?
Right. It was just a means to them to be in power, to either overthrow Aaron, to overthrow Moshe, whatever it was. That when you make a platform of conflicting constituencies, right? It's not going to work out. It's another important political lesson that we get from this week's parsha. That when you try to unite everybody, and also that's another I think snake-like sneaky thing that Korach does, is he claims to be in the interest of all the people. Kol kadoshim. Everybody is holy. We see politicians doing that all the time, right? We represent everyone, and they're playing on the fears of everybody being perhaps upset at current events, not really being so happy about the current leader, And because of that, they find people that can jump on their cause, even though they don't actually represent them, and claim to be in their name, when in fact they're also just looking out for special interests. They're looking out for, special groups, not to treat everybody equally, not to treat everyone fairly, but under the guise of being for everyone. They're not at all, and they're not for anyone either, in terms of the agendas that he's representing, or their competing agendas. That he makes no sense. And because of that, he either gets both punishments or he gets neither. When we say he gets neither, by the way, we don't mean that he got off scot-free, obviously. Rashi, to that Gemara, he points out that what that would mean is Korach gets killed in the plague that happens later on in the parsha. We have three different punishments, I guess, ultimately. We have the ground swallowing up Dasan and Aviram. We have the fire swallowing up the Nesi'ei Ha'edah. And then later on, the people complain. They say, Moshe, you killed the people. How exactly they can put the blame on Moshe when it seems like Hashem is the one that did this is unclear. But in any event, then Hashem is furious at those people that complain to Moshe, and then there's a plague that Aharon has to bring the Ketores to stop. And Rashi says that according to this opinion that Korach got neither punishment, he died in that plague. Similar to the Meraglim in last week's parsha, they also died from a plague for messing with Moshe. And it's just another, I think, if we talk about, again, what would Ibn Ezra do to connect these two parshias together, right, if they're topically connected and not historically connected. So, essentially, these are two parshias that teach us things about politics. It's something important.
I have a problem with him being killed in the fight, because, just for my own thing.
I always thought that Korach was followed up. I always thought that was...
I always assumed that also. I learned this fairly recently. Yeah. And I thought it was actually very shocking.
Because if the other people were, Hashem dealt with them immediately, and Korach was like the mastermind of the whole thing, how did he wait until the fight? I have a problem with him waiting until the fight.
I think the Maharal explains, according to the opinion that he got both punishments, he got both, I assume this means that, I don't know how, because the ground swallowing up happened first. But in any event, he explains it in a way, I'm not exactly sure how it works chronologically, but that he got punished by both, so that both groups saw that he was included in what they were getting.
He was burned underground.
Something like that.
I used to believe that it was swallowed up, but if there were two separate occurrences, the ground swallowing up people and the fire, then how is it possible to be swallowed up and then burnt?
Hashem burned him underground.
Perhaps the burning happened first for him, and then he got swallowed up and joined everybody else.
But as far as the number goes, the 250, when we're told that there were 70 people who entered Mitzrayim, then we know who they were specifically, name by name.
Although the count is off over there.
Yes,
we struggle with
one,
that.
And
right.
then they say Dina was the. But when it comes, but when they mention the 250, as far as to my knowledge, there's not a mention of each person. So
there is none. So it could be a round number. That's a possibility.
So I thought it's like when a person comes to speak and a crowd shows up in the hall. He looks over the crowd and he says, "Oh, the 250 people showed up," but he means as far as I can.
In general, right?
Yeah.
And there is room to say
Moshe Rabbeinu would say, "Oh, 250 people are there with Korach," but maybe he didn't count each one and say.
With the 70 going down to Egypt, you also have to do a little bit of working, because you have to find number 70 first of all, but then you also have to account of where are all the rest of the females, where Yaakov's daughters. Supposedly he had daughters. It would seem to be the case, besides Serach and Dinah. Those are the only girls mentioned. It's very hard to say that those are the only girls in the entire family. So we have to work around with that also.